All right, 10 a.m. Good morning, Victoria. Good morning, Vancouver. Thank you. Everybody ready? Awesome. Good morning, Terrence. Good morning, everybody in Victoria. All right. Week three. All that fundamental stuff is over now. Now we're going to have some fun. Now we're actually going to start building some things. And I'm going to do less theorizing at you during lectures and more coding at you during lectures, which I feel will be more engaging. Right? Yeah. Less questions, more tapping. That's what you all requested in your feedback, right? Exactly. Okay. Awesome. So today we're going to talk about CRUD with Express. That's the topic for today. So as a quick review, we're probably not aware of what CRUD is, but thanks to Nima's lecture yesterday, we know what Express is. So what is Express in a nutshell? Sorry? An HTML library. It is a library. They like to describe it as a framework, and we can get into a discussion about the differences between library and framework, but we'll shelve that for a bit. What do we know about Express? What do we use Express to do? What did Nima lecture at you for 2 hours about yesterday? Anything? Does this sentence jog your memory at all? Is that big enough? How's the font size back there? I know the contrast on this site is just horrendous. Fast, unopinionated, minimalist web framework for Node.js. Well, that didn't really help, did it? Is anybody going to say the S word? Server! Express allows us to very quickly build out web servers. And I'm going to say this again, and you'll hear me say this every lecture, there's no magic here. There's nothing that Express does that we can't do. All it does is wrap native libraries. Remember we looked at the packages that Node comes with? And we used the net one to do the SNEC game that unfortunately Victoria didn't get to do. Right, but we used that to make TCP requests, right? It was built into Node. We didn't have to npm install it, right? So Node also comes with HTTP and HTTPS. So again, and I've probably asked this question more than once, why would we bring in Express if Node can do what we want it to do already? It's faster to bring in someone else's code. Exactly. Why reinvent the wheel? We say that all the time. But why do that? If someone else has already written it and battle tested it, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of devs have downloaded it and used it, why don't we just use that instead? Why would we write our own, right? So that's why we're bringing in Express. So Express allows us to very, very quickly just scaffold out a web server. In fact, over the next 2 hours, while talking with you in live coding, we are going to build a complete web application. So it's extremely quick. Whereas it would be much more verbose if we had to bring in the HTTP package and write our own requests and parse our own headers and stuff like that. Okay? So, Express, a minimalist web server. What is the other big thing that Express allows us to do? One of the old lecturers here, how's the font size in VS Code at the back? Good? Okay. One of the other lecturers here used to describe Express as the infinity gauntlet. And I don't know if that reference is aging well. But what is it about? Does anybody watch the Avengers movies? All my references. Okay, everybody's going to have to fill out a poll of like things that you're aware of, and then I can start using those in my analogies. Because the McDonald one fell flat. All right. Okay, so we can't use the infinity gauntlet. What does Express allow us to do? What does it mean when it says it's unopinionated? It doesn't care. Exactly. It allows us to write packages. We can write our own packages. We call them middleware. Or we can bring in other people's packages and kind of insert them into there. If you were following it would be the infinity stones into the gauntlet. Okay? Cool. Awesome. I see one nodding head. Fantastic. So it doesn't care how we utilize it. It just gives us a framework, and we can bring in our own middleware. So did Nima talk about allows us to bring in middleware? Did Nima talk at all about what middleware is? We'll see several examples today. No? NodeMon is actually a package that helps restart your node server. We don't actually bring that into Express. So middleware in a nutshell is it sits between the request and the response. So if you want to do something, you obviously, if you remember from last Wednesday and probably subsequent readings, when you learned about HTTP and TCP, HTTP is a request response cycle, right? Web servers don't just serve things up unbidden. You don't open your laptop and Chrome says, here's that page you were looking for, and you're like, I didn't tell you to do anything, right? You have to explicitly ask to go somewhere. And then that web server sends it back. So we have this request reply thing that goes on, right? So middleware just sits between the request and the response. We can use it to parse things in the request to make it easier for us to consume them as JavaScript developers. And we can build out a response object that gets sent back to the client. Okay? So this is Express. This is why we use Express, and that's what we're going to use today. Anything for Victoria? Nope. Okay. So now we're going to do a brief discussion of REST. Did you do any readings on REST, or has anyone heard of REST? Okay. So this is awesome. Okay. So REST is one of those gigantic things that really is just, it's a complicated term for a very simple concept. Representational state transfer. There you go. That's going to be on the test. So everybody write that. No, I'm kidding. So they cheated there, but representational state transfer. It's a way of defining our routes, because you can imagine that, did you talk about routes and what routes are made up of? Verbs and paths? Am I jumping all over the place here? Okay. Okay, so if a route is made up of a verb and a path, what do we have for HTTP verbs? HTTP verbs. Thank you, get. Get is one. Can anybody think of another one? Post. Fantastic. For extra virtual cookies, any other? Nice. The other two? Put. You could use update. Is update an HTTP verb? Let's find out. HTTP verbs. No, you've got to get used to the tech community. We all just Google everything. That's one of the biggest change I noticed when I was working in a warehouse. Everybody just bought what I said. It didn't matter. I wore glasses. Everybody just said, I assume that's true, right? But now I can't do that because people will just Google it. So let's see. We have patch, trace, options, connect, delete, put, post, head, and get. Sorry, Fabio. Okay, so of these, oh, thank you, Graham. Put, exactly. So of these five, these are the most frequently used, right? Get and post. In fact, inside of HTML, they're the only ones available to us. All we have is get and post. So we have verbs, and then what is the path part of a route? If we had to break down this into this entire URL, which part is the path? Or what are the parts of the URL? The path is after the slash, exactly, up to the question mark, exactly. So there's our path right there. Everything to the left of that is the domain, as in where does this resource live, and everything after the question mark is what's known as a query string, right? And these are key value pairs. You'll see these, something like that. You'll just see them separated like that, okay? So this is the path. that we were talking about. So every route is made up of a combination of a verb and a path. And the great thing about that is it allows us to reuse, let's go back up to REST. It allows us to reuse things because this is not the same as that. So we're able to reuse our paths with a different method, and vice versa. We reuse our methods with different paths. Okay? So it allows us to very simply kind of scaffold out the basic routes to get to any resource. So what the representational state transfer says is your routes and the verb, so the verb path combination that you have, should reflect the underlying resource that you have. So as an example that we always use, so if I have a path that goes to /unicorns, let's just start with /unicorns, and we'll make that a get. What's going to come back from my request to get /unicorns from some domain? Can you make a guess at what? Without having to read the docs, without having to delve into their API, what am I going to get back from /unicorns? Unicorns, yes. All of the unicorns that they have. And if I said, remember, I'm not going to ask you any trick questions. If I make a get request to /unicorns /123, what do you think I would get back? That's right. We'd see unicorn number 123, right? So our path, our verb and our path, our route to a resource, represents the underlying data structure. And that's all representational state transfer means, is REST. And everyone refers to it as REST, and APIs that utilize it, we refer to as RESTful, because they utilize a REST API structure for their routes. So the other great thing it does is it, like I mentioned, we don't have to read the docs. If we know that they have a /users endpoint, then presumably they have a /users /one endpoint. And if they have that, we can presume that they have a /users /one /cats endpoint, something like that, because we know that users have cats. Most users. Okay, anyway. So they take a basic form. But first off, let's talk about the word at the front of it. Has anyone heard of CRUD before? Yes. Okay, what does CRUD stand for? Create, read, update, and delete. And why is that significant? Due to a resource, right? For Victoria, the answer was because these are the 4 things that we would want to do to any resource. We want to create new ones. We want to read them back. We'd want to update them, and presumably we'd want to delete them. Okay? I actually prefer, so that's CRUD. I actually prefer bread, because bread takes it a step further. So bread is browse, read, edit, add, and delete. And so the only difference between these two is that it breaks out the read into 2 separate things. So browse would be to, oh, I erased it. Browse would be to /unicorns. So you get back all of the unicorns. And read would be /unicorn /123. So you're reading a particular unicorn. So I prefer this because it just splits out the read into 2 different things. Okay? But bear in mind, the vast majority of people, they'll talk about, oh, it's just a CRUD app, or, oh, you know, and they'll talk about CRUD. Very few people will talk about bread. Okay? It's just a CRUD app, yeah. Okay, so bearing all that in mind, let's come back to REST. So we have our basic things, and so that it lines up. Edit, add, and delete. So we can define these routes in a certain way. So let's say we're looking for, we have a /resources route. So our browse would be get /resources. And you can sub this in for any noun that you've got. Cats, unicorns, dogs, potatoes, as it turns out. Spoiler. So our browse would be to get /resources. Okay? Read, as I said, would be to get shift, there we go, a particular resource, right? So resources /1, let's say. Edit. So Now we're moving away from our gets. If we want to edit something that's in state, what method would we use? Post. Exactly. So we're going to post to /resources/1 as an example. Okay? See how we're reusing this portion? We just changed the verb. Okay? Now add. We want to add something, so we're going to post again. And we'll reuse one of our routes we've already used. If we want to create a new resource, then we'll post to that particular resource. We'd make a post to /cats to create a new cat. Okay? And that leads us to delete. And while we have access to the delete keyword in some states, as I mentioned, HTTP we're limited to get and post. So this is the one where this falls apart. If you see traditional RESTful routes, it would look something like this, where you delete /resources and then the particular ID of the resource that you want to get rid of. Okay? But we don't have access to the delete word, so we have to do something like this instead. But if you can imagine, you scaffold out an entire API. Yes? It's not actually the verb, it's how they're implemented that makes it idempotent or not. It's what you do on the other side. There's no native protection there. All we're going to do is set up a server that's going to listen for these particular routes to come in, and then it's up to us to do what we're going to do. Put is just another verb. We would just have a web server that answers to put instead of get. That's all it is in a nutshell. That's it. So all the different verbs just allow us to structure our routes. Cool? Okay. Awesome. So you can imagine that if you had a web server that serves up blog posts and comments and things like that, how you would structure this out, get /blog posts or /posts. Maybe you have a web server that serves up shortened URLs, let's say. So you might have something that goes /short URL, right? Or /URLs. So this is REST. And so we're going to build, our API is going to be RESTful that we're going to build today. And we're going to use this structure to build out our bread, our browse, read, edit, add, and delete. Okay. Any questions before we jump into implementing this? We good? Victoria? Okay. So I asked Victoria for some input today. And I asked them for a noun, because our web server needs some kind of noun, something that we can substitute in for resources. And Victoria came back with potatoes. Yes, potatoes. So we are going to serve up potatoes today. So I hope everybody has an idea of different aspects of potatoes and different types. So I want to create a web server. I'm going to have to bring in, so if I ls, I see that I have my README and my server. I want to commit this to Git, so I'll run git init. There we go. Initialize an empty Git repository. And I want to bring in Express. So what do I need to do to bring in Express? I want to be able to run npm install, but what do I need to do before that? npm init. Perfect. And we'll just do npm init-y so that it fills out all of our information in our package.json for us. Cool? Awesome. Clear this. So if I ls-l, there we go. So we've got our README, our package.json, and our server.js. So I'm going to npm install. Maybe if I actually spell it correctly. So does anybody know about, so I typed in, let's run that again. Oh. Anyway, you can use the double bang to grab the previous command. So if I jump up to, oh, unfortunately, it's now cleared. So npm install express. I spelt it incorrectly. Apparently, there is an express package. You can use the double bang to grab the entire last line that you typed in. in bash. And then I just throw an S on there, and now it will run npm install express with 2 S's. Just a little aside, work on your bash skills. Cool, okay. So let's take a look at what we've got now. Now we have a node modules folder, and I'm probably gonna have to go into the package.json and get rid of the misspelled package. There we go. So now we've got our express package here. I'm gonna get rid of this so that it looks a little cleaner. There we go. Okay, so we've got our package.json all set up. We got our express. It's good time to commit to GitHub. Uh-oh. I don't want to commit this, do I? Node modules. Why is that not a good idea? Exactly. There's an absolute ton of folders in here, and it's going to make our Git, it's just going to be absolutely massive, right? And anybody who has to clone it is going to be sitting there forever watching it clone. So how do I remove this from my Git? .git ignore, awesome. So we're going to touch .git ignore, and we can vim into that. There we go. And we're just going to add node modules. Awesome. So now if I run git status again, or on branch master, no more git modules. So I run git add, or sorry, node modules. Git add, run git status again to make sure that we're not going to commit anything we don't want to. Everything looks good. Git commit -m, initial commit. Awesome. Git status, perfect. Okay, so now we can structure out our web server. First thing I want to do is create our potatoes object. We need a potatoes object in memory. So, what attributes do potatoes have? Sorry? Color. Awesome. I'm going to go with the American version of color, simply because if you go back and forth, you'll get confused in CSS land, because everything is that. Okay? So, our first potato is going to be what color? Golden. I like it. What other attributes do potatoes have? Size. Thank you, Terrence. Size. So probably another string, right? So our first one's going to be golden, and what size? Anything? Large. Awesome. Okay. And then we got another one, type. Perfect. Everything's strings. Let's go. Weight. There we go. Okay, so we need a type of potato. Sorry? Yam. Yam, golden, large potato. Sure. Okay. We'll have yams as the next one. Russet. There we go. And a weight. Average weight per potato in grams.
3 grams. No, probably not 3.
Let's go with 3. Okay, so we're going to create a couple of these because we're going to want to serve up multiple potatoes. Okay, so our color of a yam is an orange, right? And we'll go medium just for interest's sake. And we'll say yam. And what's the weight on a yam? 70? Awesome. And our third one, Victoria posted a list of potato cultivars. Wow. That's a lot of potatoes. All right, does anybody have a favorite one off of there? Off of the list of potatoes? We'll create more potatoes later. This isn't the final time to create potatoes. Anything? Purple? We need something that's purple. We'll go with small and purple. And what are we going to call, what type of potato is this one? Sorry? Tiny potato? That's the type of potato? And we need a weight. 1. Awesome. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so we have this object in memory now, right? It's a bunch of different potatoes, and we need to create routes that our web server can serve up these potatoes to some client who's really interested in potatoes. Possibly McDonald's. Possibly, if anyone goes there, I can't imagine anybody actually going to McDonald's. All right. Where was I? Sorry about the slurping, Victoria. Okay, so we have our object in memory. I'm just going to collapse it for right now. What do we need to do to get our express into this? How do we use our common JS syntax to bring in our express file that we just downloaded? Const express equals require express. Exactly. And then we're going to create a new app, right? So we're just going to invoke express to give us our brand new app. And we're going to set up a port. I like port 3000. Does anybody have a preference? 8080. Awesome. How many ports do we have available to us for every internet connection? 65,536. That's correct. I had to give the TCP lecture. It just kind of like, it just sticks in there. Okay, so we've got our port set up. What's the last thing we need to do to make our web server actually do something? Sorry? Well, we already created our server by invoking Express. So we've got our server. We just need to tell our server, if we run this file right now, node server, it doesn't actually do anything. So what do we need to tell it to do? Listen. Perfect. App.listen. We pass in our port. And this takes a callback, amazingly. And we're just going to console.log, server listening on port. There we go. And drumroll, hey, server's listening on port 8080. All right, so how do we check and see if our server is actually what it claims? It claims it's listening. Go to the browser. Okay. So I'm going to type in localhost, and we said 8080. And what type of request am I about to make? Get. Exactly. And we see the reply from Express is cannot get. Okay? This is something you're going to see all the time as you're developing, because it means that you just haven't set up a route that matches that particular whatever somebody typed into here. We could also type in like /potatoes like we'd like to. Is it OES? Is it OS? Oh, I'm going to have trouble today. Cannot get potatoes. So true. Okay. Any questions about this before we start serving up our potatoes? Okay. So in between here and down here where we tell it to listen, we need to set up a route. So how do we get Express to listen for a particular route? How do we get it to the point where it will answer to get/potatoes, which would be our B. Well, presumably we want to access the server, right? So we'd start with app. And then maybe if we look through here, we might have get. Okay, awesome. And get is a method that takes 2 arguments. Does anybody remember what the first argument is? That is going into the callback. Yes, that would be the second argument. So the second argument is request and response. We'll just make that an arrow function. Awesome. But what is the first argument? The route, the path, actually, yes, to complete our route. So if we are going to use RESTful routes and our browse route is going to get/resources, what is our path going to be? Our resource is potatoes /potatoes. And did we arrive at whether it's, they don't pluralize there. Is it OES? We good? Okay, cool. Awesome, fantastic. Okay, so now we have defined a path to /potatoes, right? So if I kill the server and restart it, sorry? Oh, and we're back. Wow, awesome. There we go. Perfect. Did you miss anything in the meantime? Hopefully not too much. Okay, so we've got our app.get. We're going to /potatoes. we should be able to satisfy this cannot get potatoes, right? So get request, and I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to zoom in. It's just spinning. How come it's just spinning? It's waiting for a response. Exactly. So our contract with HTTP is we get a request and a response. So the response has to come back. The browser will just sit there waiting until it times out. Okay. So how do we send a response back to our browser? Presumably, we want to utilize the response object that we got passed into our callback, right? And maybe something like send. We could send the response. Let's try something like that. Kill this, restart it, and potatoes! There we go. That actually resolved. I'm not sure why that resolved. It must retry the request over and over. Potatoes. So we got back a string. If we check in our, wow, that's tiny. Let's go into our network tab. And let's refresh the page. And we can see that we made a request. Make bigger. You make bigger. No, this way make bigger. There we go. Status 200. And apparently we made a service worker request as well. But we made a request to /potatoes, localhost 8080/potatoes, right? It came back 200. And if we check and see what the response was, we got a preview, potatoes, there we go. Our response was one line. We just sent back potatoes. But the response also had headers that came back. And the request had headers that got sent along. Did you look at any of this stuff yesterday? Okay, cool. So you see that a lot of stuff is happening behind the scenes that we're not necessarily, or our users, we are going to become more and more accustomed to what's going on here, but the users of a web browser don't necessarily know that any of this stuff is happening, right? It's all just happening for them. Cool. Okay, so we were able to successfully respond to a request, but this is not how we actually want to send this back, is it? That's not super consumable. Well, we could send entire text, and we could, you know, send back some HTML or something like that. We're going to use a better way. We're going to use a view templating engine. And what templating engines do you know about? EJS, awesome. What does EJS stand for? Sorry? Embedded JavaScript, exactly. And for bonus points, is EJS server-side or client-side rendering? Server-side rendering, and what does that mean? How do you define pretty? Okay, for Victoria, the answer was it makes stuff and sends it to the client. I'll take that. So what it does is it takes the template that we provide it, it subs in all of our JavaScript things that we've asked it to do, like maybe we've asked it to loop through, say, an object containing potatoes or something like that, renders them all, so creates an HTML file, and then sends that to the client. So it's rendered on the server side, but what the client gets is just pure HTML. That's all they get. There's no JavaScript, no anything else. We're just building it out on the server and sending it to the client. Okay? So I need to bring in EJS, right? But we don't do the require the way that, did you use EJS yesterday? Have you used EJS? Okay, how do we bring it into our package? How do we set it up so that our app can use it? Yes, ultimately, but we have to tell it that we want to use it as a rendering engine. How do we tell our app? Sorry? Is it app.set? It's what? View engine EJS? Does that sound right? Awesome. Cool. So now we've told it. We didn't need to bring it in. We didn't need to require it or whatever. Express will take care of that for us. We just need to tell it which view engine we want. Okay, so what was the next portion that we needed to do? We needed to actually create some templates, right? And what is the default directory that EJS will look in, or Express will look in for EJS templates? Is it view or views? Views. Cool. There we go. And let's touch views slash, let's just call the first one potatoes.js. Oh, sorry. I made a mistake, didn't I? Did anybody catch that? Potatoes.ejs, exactly. Okay, I just used the mv command to rename the file. Okay, awesome. So now we have an EJS file in our views directory, potatoes, views, here we go. And let's scaffold this out. So I'll use the super quick do I not have the ability to HTML file? Oh, because it's EJS file, of course. I'm going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. So we don't really need the head. Let's just go with the body. And we'll just throw in for right now, just to make sure that everything's working, potatoes are awesome. There we go. So it's slightly different than what we were returning before. Okay, so now we have a potatoes.ejs. What do we need to do in here? We can't just send anything anymore. We need to do something. It's that R word that we were talking about. In order to redirect, we'd need to have a path to redirect to. This is our very first path. This is to /potatoes. We need to server-side render. There we go. And we just tell it which one we want, which is potatoes. So we're saying just render, look in the views directory, and render this EJS file. Okay, let's see if this is actually working. Node server.js, listening on port 8080, and let's try and hit /potatoes, and we get back an H1. Wow, that looks really wrong for some reason. Potatoes are awesome. Okay, so far so good, right? It's 10:38, and we have a web server that's answering to routes. Pretty, okay. Now, how do we get the potatoes object? So we have all these lovely potatoes here. How do we serve this up? What is the other argument to render? Did you talk about this yesterday? Passing template vars? So we can define an object called template vars. And inside of that, we can pass in our potatoes. And we could do this if we wanted, potatoes, potatoes. But if we are using ES6, we can just say potatoes, right? If the key and the value have the same name, you can just use one. Is that confusing to anybody, or can I use this syntax? Okay, cool. So now we have a template vars, and we can pass that as a second argument to our render function. So now nothing ostensibly has changed. If we look at this, we're still getting, okay, apparently new tab. Potatoes are awesome. We're still getting this every time we refresh. So how do we consume, now that we're passing this potatoes object to potatoes, how do we consume this inside of our potatoes.ejs? We can embed JavaScript, right? Okay. So why don't we make an unordered list? And why don't we use a for loop? For const key in potatoes. I'm using in. And like I said, I always close my brackets and everything when I get started. That way I don't get confused afterwards. Is everyone familiar with this syntax? Used EJS, right? Okay, so what is the difference between less than percent symbol and then less than percent symbol equals? Yes, sorry. Oh, is there, okay. Sorry? What? when there's no equals, you're just writing code. When there's an equals, you're actually going to output it, whatever it is. So if you use an equal sign, you're actually going to output whatever's on the other side. So if we had a potato, we would want to output it, but we don't want the user to see this code. This is our JavaScript code. Okay? Yes, you had a question. So the question for Victoria is, we don't need to express anything or import it into here. Is that what you're saying? It just comes along for the ride, essentially. And this just knows about it. Yes, it is a function of the render method. So what it's saying is, render this, because we didn't have to use EJS. We could have used any templating engine. So what it's saying is, render this template, the one that matches this, and pass it this object. And inside of there, we can define our own keys and values that we'll have access to in here. Okay, so we're looping through potatoes. Okay, we have access to the key that's in there. So why don't we build out some LIs? And we'll just make this like an H2. And we'll output the key. Why don't we say something like potato number key is, and what do we have available to us? We have type. Why don't we go with type for right now? So we need potatoes at key dot type. Okay, so ideally, if this works, we should see an unordered list with a bunch of H2s with all of our different potatoes in them, showing the key for each one and the type for each one. Unless I've messed something up. Node server, listening on port 8080, and we refresh here, and we get back potato number 1 is russet, potato number 2 is yam, and potato number 3 is tiny potato. Awesome. There we go. Moving along. Okay, any questions about what we did here or how we managed to get our potatoes into our template? We good? Okay, so just remember that you can set this up. If you're curious, we also could have just inlined here, and we didn't need to use this one. Okay, you don't have to define the variable. You can just do it inline as an anonymous object. Okay? I will continue to do it this way for just for clarity, so that we can see what we're passing in. Okay, so that's browse, all done. So what's our next one? Read, right? Okay, so if we jump back to here, we see that our read is we're going to get /resources, whatever it is, and then the ID. Okay, so we need a path that matches that. So let's go back to our server. App.get. Our path is going to be /potatoes, but we can't just do something like this, right? We don't want to hard code a particular potato in here, or we don't want to have to write out every route that's going to match to each one of our potatoes. So how do we put a variable into our express path? Sorry? Colon. Exactly. And we can call this whatever we want. We could call this potato, we can call it ID, we can call it num. For simplicity, let's call it ID. We get our callback function with a request and response. Okay, so how do we access this variable now? It's on the request object, right? Because it's part of the request. One of the things that Express does for us is it parses the path for us. And it puts everything that we put in there inside of params, inside of the params object. And the key is whatever we named the variable. So if we want to make reference to this, const potato ID equals request.params.id. So we're able to pull that out of this path, okay? Later on, you'll have your short URLs and your key that points to them, and you're going to pull them off just like this. Request.params. Whatever we had named this. If we named this num, then this would be request.params.num. Okay? These are our variables. We are in control of it because ultimately someone's going to visit /potatoes/2. And they don't care. Like I said, we're abstracting this away. They don't care how we implemented it. They just want to see potato number 2, right? For whatever reason. Okay. So now we have a particular ID, and we have an object full of keys and values. How do we get the particular potato that matches that ID from the object? What's going to be, if we have our template bars, and I'm going to set it up, prime it with a potato key, what's going to be the value for the potato key? We have an object called potatoes, and we have a key called potato ID. How do we access that particular potato? Square brackets, right? Or, yeah, we'll go with square brackets. Potato ID. That shouldn't really come as a surprise to anybody. We have the ID, so we're going to look inside this object at this ID. And why, just a quick review of the last couple of weeks, why can't we do that? Sorry? Because it is a number, but also because our potatoes object does not have a key called potatoes ID, right? So this syntax would be looking inside the potatoes object literally for something called potato.id. This is the equivalent of like potato.type or something like that, right? But it doesn't have a potato ID key. Instead, we want to interpolate this variable. We want to get that answer back and find out, is it 1, is it 2, is it 3, and then look inside the potatoes object at that. Okay? Cool. So we want a response.render, and we'll call this potato detail. And then we'll pass our template bars. Cool. Now we have a route that matches get/potato/ID and sends back that particular potato. Clear this, node server, /js. Potatoes are still awesome. And if we go to /potato/2, we get failed to look up view potato detail in the views directory. What could that mean? That's correct. We need to add, ooh, look at that. We need to touch in the views directory something called potato detail. Is it detail or details? Let's go with details. Potato details.ejs. Now it will actually be able to look that up. And if we restart our server, no, I don't want to save this. Thank you. Now at least we shouldn't see an error. We just don't see anything at all. But we're actually able to accept that and send back. It's just the fact that this is an empty file, so nothing's actually being sent back. They're just getting an empty file. Potato details. HTML. I wonder if I tell it, it already knows that I'm using HTML. Yes. Can I not use? Ah, there it is. Awesome. Has anybody used that quick scaffolding in VS Code? It's fantastic. Let's do that again. So you just type in HTML5, HTML. I press the down arrow to go to 5, I press enter, and I just get this scaffolded out. So I just get a doc type, HTML, a head, and a body. Because I can never remember all the stuff that goes into the head. So this is fantastic. Okay, so we're going to call this single potato. And inside of our body, we're going to say just one potato. And then we have to do our EJS thing. So we look at our server. What are we getting back? We're getting back something called potato. And a potato has a color, a size, a type, and a weight. So let's go into here and let's output that. Let's go with an H3. So we have our type, and we'll have potato.type. Another H3, and we have what? Weight. We can move these around if we need to. Potato.weight. We also had color, right? Potato.color. And what was our other thing that we added? Type. Nope. Size, color, size. J3. Too helpful. There we go. And size. Potato.size. Cool. All right. So if this works, we should see that we get back just one potato and all the attributes of that potato. Okay. Start the server back up again. Port 8080. We refresh. Just one potato. Type russet, weight 3, color golden, size large. Go to potatoes 2, yam, 70, orange and medium. Potatoes 3, tiny potato, weight 1, color purple, size small. Okay. 10:52. So right before we go for break, why don't we make this a little bit easier to navigate through? Because now we have some paths that are set up. We can actually start linking these things back and forth. So wouldn't it be nice if we could just click on this and it would take us to that potato page? So let's wire that up. Where is my... So at the top of the detail page, let's put in a link with an href. So we want to send people to the potatoes page, right? So we'll say /potatoes. And we'll close that. There we go. And we'll say home. So we're going to send someone back to the potatoes page. And if we jump into our view and potatoes, why don't we wrap? I guess we can just wrap this entire thing in an href. Okay, so this is where it might get a little weird. Where do we want to send people who click on the potato? What is the route that we want to send them on? We know that it's going to be a GET request because anchor tags are always GET requests. Okay? So where do we want to send them to if this, let's say it's russet. Where do we want to send them to? We want to send them to the detail page for that particular potato, right? So we know it's going to be /potatoes /something, but what's the something going to be? It's the key, exactly. So how do we get it in here? The same way we got it into everything else. Just like that. And so EJS will come in here, and they'll substitute this in. They'll extrapolate whatever the key is, 1, 2, or 3, and then build out the rest of this route for us. Okay? So we can see that. If I open this up, and I type in node server, and, oh, I got another error. Exactly. It's already running over here. This is yet another error that you're going to see a lot while you're at Lighthouse. All the errors start with capital E. I always try and read that as part of the word, so I'm like, E-adder in use? What does that mean? The E stands for error. So if you ignore the E, if I could put my finger over top of the E, what does the rest of it say? Address in use. Exactly. You will see this error over and over. So before you request assistance, you know how to deal with this, right? It's because it's running somewhere else, okay? You're already using that port on your computer, okay? That's what that error means. So let's restart this. Node server, there we go. And if we refresh, we see that these are all links now. Apparently I've visited them all already. If we click on that, we go to potatoes/2. If we click home, we go back. And if we inspect this, we'll look inside of our elements. So look inside our UL. Look inside of our H2, we see that we have an href that points to potato/1 and potato/2. EJS took care of interpolating all that information for us. Okay? And if you want to see that again, all we did was, importantly, inside of the string, we just use the equal sign to make sure that gets written out. Okay? 10:56. Any questions before we go to break? We're good? Okay. 10 minutes. I'll see you back here. All right. Ready for round 2? Cool. Okay. Any questions come up over the break? Anything? Any thoughts? Anything? Okay. So we are working our way through bread to serve up our potatoes. So we've hit on browse, and we've gotten to read. But I do want to touch on something. This whole time, we've been making requests. Yes, potatoes are awesome. We've been making all of these requests. I refreshed this page a whole bunch of times. We're not getting any output from our server. We got output when something went wrong, but we're not getting anything going on our server here. So I want to add a logger to, has anyone talked to you about loggers yet? Okay, so I'm going to add a logger called Morgan. And like I said, if you want to find out anything about it, you just type in npm and the name of the package. So let's look at the npm page. Nimble Pixie Merchant, neutral point measurement, nightly piano man. There we go. So Morgan, downloaded 1.9 times a week. Morgan equals require Morgan, named after Dexter, a show you should not watch until completion. Fair enough. Okay, so Morgan is a logger, and it is middleware. And what does middleware do? It sits between the request and the response. So Morgan will log out for us all of the requests that come out to our web server. So we can take a look at, we have various different methods that we can give it. Morgan combined, where are we looking for? Okay, so these are all the different ways that it will, think of these as console logs, where everything with a colon in front of it gets interpolated. So we'd see, like, if we used combined, we'd see the remote address, the remote user, the date, the method of the request, the URL, stuff like that. That seems a little verbose for us. We see common. I like dev. I consider myself to be a dev. You're all devs. Why don't we go with dev? Does that sound good? Well, this is the output. We'll see the method, the URL, the status, the response time in milliseconds, and the content length of the response for some reason. You can't win them all. Okay? So how do we get that in there? We're going to say Morgan, and then we're going to pass in the string dev. So npmi Morgan. There we go. Successfully installed. Now we can bring it into our server file. So underneath our potatoes here, const Morgan equals require Morgan. And then here we're going to say app.use, give it Morgan, spelled correctly, and give it the string dev. There we go. And now if we restart our server, clear this, node server, server listening on port 8080. If I navigate to /potatoes, we now see that we got a request to /potatoes. And it received a 304. I'm not entirely sure what this service worker is happening here, but it keeps 404ing, so hopefully that's not an issue. But we see that we actually get some logging now. Someone visited /potatoes. The response was 304. And it took 11.237 milliseconds to send the response. And the response length was nothing. So does anybody know what a 304 is? HTTP cats, 304. Have I shown you the cats? I haven't yet, hey? 304 is my favorite HTTP cat. Oh, tiny. Okay, so anyone who's not familiar with this, HTTP cats is just all of the different HTTP codes demonstrated with cat memes. Okay, so 304 is not modified. So from generation to generation to generation, not modified. So what does that mean for us? It means that our server was smart enough to say, you requested /potatoes, and I remember I requested it by refreshing this page, and it said, that document hasn't been modified since the last time you requested it, so just use the one you have cached in your memory. So it's not actually making the request. That's what a 304, it made the request, but the response was, just use the one you've already got. I'm not going to send you a new one. And that's why our response has no body, no content length. Okay? And if we click around inside potato1, so we went to /potato/1. If we see here, we got get /potato/1. And if we navigate back to the home page, we see that we get /potatoes. And again, 304 code, right? Not modified. So this is the advantage of a logger, is we can now see everything that's going on with our system. We can see all of the requests that are coming in, not just the times that it throws an error, okay? So consider adding it to your projects because it really helps with the visibility of these HTTP requests. Cool. Okay, so what comes after read? Edit, right? If we're doing bread. So let's take a look at our edit. It's going to be a post request this time because we're going to make changes to an object in memory, right? So we're going to post to /resources/1. So we need to set up something that's going to listen for that. So we need to post to /potatoes. Again, we're going to call it ID. And then we get the request and the response object. Cool. So once again, we need to grab the potato ID because we need to edit it. Now, what do we use post methods for? We use post methods to update some resource, right? Some resource that we have in memory. Maybe it's in a database. Maybe it's just an object in memory, like a list of shortened URLs, perhaps, something like that. But we need to edit it. So where does the edit fit in? Do we pass it as parameters in here, and we'd say like new potato name, something like that? How do we send these things along? Victoria, Nicola is the potato of the year for 2016. Very nice. Post requests have a body, right? That shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, hopefully. Okay, so, but how do we need to bring something in order to get access to the body, right? What do we need? We need something that's going to parse the body for us. Body parser? Awesome, thank you. npmi, body parser. Perfect, okay. And then up here, const body parser equals require body parser. And then in our app.use section, I like to set my files up so that all of my requires are at the top, all of my constants. Then I set up all my app.set, my app.use, and then the routes, and then the listen down at the bottom. That way, if I need to know where something is, it's right there. So body parser, and we invoke that, I believe. Body parser. Body parsing middleware, npm install, require, yep. Where is the code snippet? There we go, body parser dot URL encoded extended false. That's exactly the line that I want. Okay, so presumably you've all seen body parsers before, because you're using them in your things. Okay, what am I telling it here? What kind of data am I telling it to expect that the body will be encoded in? It'll be URL encoded, right? Hence the .url encoded. There's also a body parser.json. There's all kinds of different data types. What does URL encoded mean? It means that it's going to look like type equals russet. And what did we have? Size equals medium. And it's going to look just like this, okay? And so what the body parser is going to do is it's going to look at that URL encoded data. It's going to parse it, as in change it into something else. And it's going to attach it to the request object for us, specifically to the .body property. And it's going to break them out into key value pairs. And it's going to do all of that for us. just by doing this one line here, bodyparser.url encoded, okay? The extended says, do you want to be able to send complex things like objects and arrays? And we don't actually want to do that, so we're just setting extended to false. If you do want to be able to handle URL encoded objects, then you would just change this to true, okay? So now we have a body parser. So that means that our request object has a body property that has all of our data about our potato in it. So do we want to have the ability to change everything about a potato? Do we want to just change certain things about a potato? Should we say everything? Color, size, type, and weight? Okay. So can I use ES60 structuring here? Is that okay? Body, size, type, and weight. So just as a review, this is the equivalent of saying const body equals, oh, body. That's not the name of one of my things. What is it? Color, size, type, and weight. What did I miss? Color, I think. Okay, so this is the equivalent of saying color equals request.body.color, right? We're just using ES60 structuring to pull it off, okay? You'll see this more and more because it's super handy. This one line of code replaced 4 lines of code, okay? So you'll see this in a lot of examples. It's very, very handy. Is that confusing to anybody? Can I leave that like that? Okay, I'm not hearing any objections. Okay, cool. So now we have, presumably, we have the ID of the potato that we want to update, and we have all of the different aspects of a potato that can be updated. So how are we going to update the object inside the object? Well, we need to make reference to our potatoes, right? At potato ID. That gives us the particular potato that we want to edit. And we could do something like, does that work for everybody? Size equals size. Type equals type. And weight equals weight. So now we've gone inside the potatoes object at that particular potato ID, and we're setting it equal to this. The other option that we could do if we trusted this data and didn't want to do anything with it, just very quickly, we could say potatoes at potato ID equals request.body. Because this request body object is going to be an object with a color, a size, a type, and a weight. So we could just do this. If you don't want to do any kind of error checking or anything, you could just set it equal to here. I'll leave it like this so it's a little more explanatory about what's going on. Okay, so we have been able to accept the body to a post request to /ID. We've pulled out all of the information. We have updated our object in memory, and now what do we need to do? If somebody sent a request to this endpoint, it would just hang, right? Because we haven't done anything with the response object, right? Okay, so how are we going to respond to this? We could render something, but what would we render? Where would we want to send somebody after this? If they edit a particular potato, we'd probably want to send them to that potatoes page, right? So we could do something like this and just copy all of this over, right? Or we could do what we call the post redirect get method. So we are going to accept the post request. We're going to redirect to /potatoes /potato ID, because we're on the server now, so I can use string interpolation. Okay? And so what this saves us from having to do is duplicate all of this logic here. because otherwise you'd have to copy that into every one of your post routes. We already have a get route that can answer and serve up that potatoes information, right? So why don't we reuse something we've already created? We went through all that effort. So when we say redirect, we're saying you tried this endpoint, now go try another endpoint. And we're saying to the client's browser, go to somewhere else. And so the client's browser will say, okay, where should I go? I'm going to go to /potatoes/ whatever the potato ID is. Can I make a GET request to that? And then this endpoint will say, yes, I know how to answer that. Here's the potato you were looking for. Okay? So we don't want to have to duplicate this. So whenever you get a post request, you always want to redirect back out of it. Okay? Do whatever you're going to do, manipulate the object in memory, do all that stuff, and then redirect the client. Okay? And we'll take a look at what that looks like in our network tab. Okay, so this is great. We can now access a post, but we're going to need to add a form, aren't we? So that we can edit all of this. Okay, so what two properties does every HTML form have? For a form, no, it doesn't have a body and a head. It has two attributes that are on the form object. Action is one, and a method is the other one. Perfect. And you'll never guess what these map to. /potatoes/ what did we say? Oh, you know what we don't have in here? We don't have access to the potatoes ID. That's the one thing that we don't have access to in here. So how are we going to fix that? What are all the variables that EJS view has access to? That was weird. Where are these variables? Like, what does this view have access to from this file? What's passed in? Exactly. So if we want to get this potato ID, we're going to have to pass it in. Potato ID. There we go. So again, that's the equivalent of potato ID, but we're just going to use ES6 shorthand and just toss in potato ID. So now inside of here, we have access to potato ID. There we go. Okay, so now we have our form. And you'll note that verb and path, okay? That's not a coincidence. This is how HTTP is set up, verb and a path. So our form has a verb and a path to it, okay? Okay, so what do we need inside? Let's do label 4. We have type, and we'll go with type. Input, I'm giving it an ID so that the label matches up to it. This is for screen readers and stuff. You don't have to do this because it will just naturally sit in the DOM right above the other elements, okay? Or sit on the web page. We haven't discussed the DOM yet, have we? No. Cool. That'll be next week. Awesome. So this ID you don't need. This is just so that our labels match up, okay? What do we need on this input so that it gets along to our server? So that the proper encoding goes along. How do we give this thing a key? Because presumably the value for our key value will be whatever the input contains. How do we tell our server this is the type field? Sorry? Oh, name. Exactly. Thank you. That's exactly right. We give it the name attribute. So on the other side, when the body gets parsed back out again, this would be one of those type equals russet kind of things, right? So when it'll get URL encoded as this is the key, and whatever the user typed in is the value. So on the far side, we can access it with request.body.type, okay? So we'll throw that in there. Oh, type equals text. There we go. And I'm going to put in a line break. And now we need to do this again a couple more times. Once for weight. Change this to weight. So many places. Okay. And next one up will be color. There we go. And finally, size. There, there, and there. Size. Oh, escape. Size. And what's the final thing that we need to do so that this form can actually be submitted? We need to be able to submit it. We need to give our client some way to submit the form, right? So what if we go with a button? We'll call it type equals submit. By the way, if you call this type equals button, it won't go anywhere. By telling it the type is submit, we're saying when this button gets clicked, submit the form that this button is inside of, okay? Close the button, and we'll call this update potato. Awesome. Okay, so now we have a form that has a method and an action. It will accept all the different, the type, the weight, the color, and the size, and then we have a button that will submit the form, right? So let's restart our server. Node server. There we go. And we'll refresh this, potatoes. We'll go into potato number 1, just one potato, has a type, a weight, color, and a size. So let's change this one. Let's say we want to keep it as a russet, and let's keep the weight the same, but let's change the color. Blue, awesome, thank you. And the size?
1,000,000 pounds.
That's a big size. Okay, and fingers crossed we hit update potato. Now we see just one potato, type is russet, weight is 3, color is blue, and the size is 1,000,000 pounds. Okay, and if we look at Morgan, we see that we got the get request to serve up the page, which came back as 200 okay. Then we received a post request to /potatoes/1 in this case. So that was our form submitting. And we see that we got a 302. You can probably guess what 302 is in HTTP Catland. Found. Wow, that didn't really help out. But the early 300s, 301, 302 are redirections. Okay, so we redirected. We said we did all of the work that we wanted to do. We updated our object in memory. Then we redirected the client. So we said to the client, great, you made a post request to here, everything's fine, but this is not the resource you're looking for. You're actually looking for /potatoes/1. So what the browser did, if you noticed when I submitted the form, this refreshed, but we were still on the same page. So we actually made another GET request for the updated information. Okay, so remember, post, redirect, GET. Okay, and we can see that all here, and then let's take a look at it in the dev tools as well. So we'll go to the network tab. We'll refresh this. We see that we made our GET request to localhost 8080 /potatoes/1. We'll keep everything the same except for the type this time. Does anybody have another type? What do we call a 1,000,000-pound blue potato? Super duper potato. There we go. So I'm going to click update, and let's watch that network tab and see what happens. Okay. So we made a request, and we can actually take a look at the type of request. Request headers, no cache, keep alive, no cache. Look, there's our form data. It got sent along with the request. View it as URL encoded. Oh, wow. So super duper potato didn't actually go as super space duper space potato. Since it had to URL encode it, it had to make it a valid URL. And you can't have spaces in a valid URL, right? You'll see something like the +sign or %20, if you ever see those, okay? So super duper potato, we see that as So what it did for us behind the scenes was it URL encoded it and sent it to our server. And then our middleware parsed it back again, and we were able to update our object in memory. Okay? So we see our form data there. We go down here. It found that, and then it made another GET request to the same route. Okay? Something that might be a little confusing, so I just want to demonstrate it here, is if you don't do anything here. What happens if you give an HTTP form no method and no action? Or in this case, empty method, empty action. Sorry? Okay, so one of the guesses for Victoria is that you could enter data into the form, but nothing will happen. Any other guesses about what we're going to get from this form and what's going to happen? Cool, awesome. Does anybody think error? Is this gonna blow up on us? No, no votes for error? Nobody wants to vote for error. All right. Okay. So we'll refresh this. We're at our single potato. Hey, we reset. And now we're gonna say, what do we call it? Super duper potato. Weight of 12, color blue, and million pounds. Okay, and I'm gonna hit update potato and watch the screen. We're now back up to the top of the screen, but we're not exactly visiting the same URL. Can everybody see that? Is that big enough? Zoom in a little more. So the default behavior of an HTML form, if you give it no method and no action, is to make a GET request to the same page that it started at. So it made another GET request. That's why we saw the screen flash. But it said, I don't know what to do with this data, so it's URL encoded. I'm going to put it in as query string parameters. So this is the same thing that would happen if you if you said method equals GET. It would pass it along as query string parameters. So we see that we have type equals super plus duper plus potato, weight is 12, color is blue, and size is 1,000,000 pounds. Okay? So it didn't actually error out on us. It just did the default. And you'll see that a lot in various different frameworks. If you don't pass any kind of configuration, you just get the default behavior. Okay? So if you notice that your screen is refreshing and you're getting stuff up here, it's because you haven't given your form a method and an action. Okay? Cool. So let's make sure this is back to normal. See, we can actually see it here. We got a GET request to /potato/1, and then we got the query string tacked onto that. And if that's what you were looking for, that's great, because you'll notice that if you if we go to Google, and we do a Google search for potatoes, we actually see that we get this massive, all this gross stuff up here in our query string. Let me see if I can peel this down a little bit. And source, and there should be a point where we can get, there it is, the OQ, which is, it's kind of like OG, but not as cool. It's fine to laugh at these jokes later. That's awesome. On repeat viewing and stuff, that's great. Okay, so if we get rid of all that other garbage, we see that it actually put it in as the original query was potatoes. Why would Google do this? Why wouldn't it submit it as a form? Like, we didn't see anything show up in our URL with our post requests, and we're just editing potatoes. Why do you think Google would want to send it as a GET request in the URL? Any reasons? Have you ever done a Google search and then copied the URL and sent it to somebody? Like, what would happen if I just cut this out of here, open a new browser tab, paste it in, and press enter? Wow. Apparently, it needs all that other jazz. Okay, let's do another one. I stripped too much out. Potatoes. Okay, so I copy this, and I paste it into here. And now I've done a search for potatoes, right? So you could do a search for something and then send it to someone. And that's kind of why they've elected to go this route rather than obfuscating, like hiding the data that's passed along, okay? So that you can copy these links and share them with each other. And I can say, hey, I did this wicked search for potatoes, check it out. And then you can see the same search results, okay? I recommend that. Do it to every non-technical person you know. Just send them Google links. Awesome. Any questions about how we got to where we're at? We are at BRE, and we have 24 minutes left for A and D. Okay, cool. Victoria? Awesome. Okay, so now we've reached add. So we're going to actually need to do two things here. So in the potato details, we just embedded the form, but that doesn't look really great. Wouldn't it be nice if we could redirect to like a new potato page where you could type in a type, a weight, a color, and a size, and just submit it from there? Okay. So we need to do two things. We need to answer a GET request to get that form, and then we need to answer a POST request for when that form is submitted, right? So we've got two actions that our server needs to be able to handle. We're going to get the form, and then we're going to handle the form submission. Oh, incidentally, server's still running? Server's running, awesome. You don't need to click submit on a form that has an action and a method on it. You can just hit enter. And of course, I didn't pass in any values, so it just overrode everything with empty string. But just as an aside, that's because if you're used to typing in like username, password, press enter, that's just the default behavior that we get from HTML. So you don't necessarily have to have a button with the type of submit, just as an aside. Okay. So we want to be able to handle a app.get. What is it going to look like? Our add, ultimately we're going to have a post to /resources, but typically this will be in conjunction with a get to /resources/new. And that's how we'll send back the new form to be posted to this endpoint, okay? So we need to be able to get potatoes/new, request and response. There we go. And we want to response.render, and we'll call this new potato. Okay, do we need to pass it any template bars? Is it going to have any dynamic data? Presumably not, right? It's just going to be a basic HTML form. So we can just render new potato. So we need to touch views/new potato.ejs. There we go. Jump into here, views, new potato. There we go. Make sure that it knows that it's HTML. There we go. Nice. New potato. Okay. Create a new potato. And just while we're up here, what if somebody makes a mistake and they don't want to? Let's just give them an easy way to go back to the home page. Okay. So now we are going to add our form in. Okay, what does every form have? An action. Sorry, method. We post, and our action will be to, where is the README? There it is. We are actually just going to post, so the way that you create a new of X resource, whatever it is you make a post request to that base route, right? Because it wouldn't make sense to make a post request to /resources/whatever, because it doesn't actually have an ID yet. We're creating a whole new resource, right? Okay, so we're going to /potatoes. Awesome. And then why don't I steal the form that we've already created rather than having to reinvent it. There we go. Incidentally, one of the things that templating engines allows us to do is embed templates inside of templates. Okay? So if we had more than 19 more minutes, I might pull this form out because we're using it in 2 places, pull it out to another component that gets required into this component and the new form component. Okay? Because they have essentially the same thing, it just, the only thing that changes is the action. And I might use some JavaScript conditional statements or something to render that. Or I might pass the action along as something in the template bars. Right? Yes? Yes, exactly the same. Yep. So you might have a partials file that takes care of, say, all of your includes in the head, right? And you just bring in that partials file for that. Cool. So we have our new potato, and we're just going to paste in this form and make sure that we change it to the method post, and we can change this to create potato. Awesome. So now we have a form that will make a post request to /potatoes, collecting all of this information, and it has a submit button. Okay. So that should be working for us. If we go to /potatoes/new, was it not like type is undefined? Oh. How much did I copy? Hang on a second. Oh, I see what's happening. Okay. Does anyone else see what's happening? I knew this gotcha would get us at some point. Why am I not seeing my new potato form? Everything else is working. I can click on this. I can see potatoes number 2. /new. Cannot read property type of undefined. But why is it showing me this screen? Why is it showing our potato details.ejs instead of showing me new potatoes? Did I type something? No. res.render new potato. It's 1 line of code. I mean, I can mess up a lot of stuff, but 1 line of code is hard to mess up. Why are we seeing this screen instead of the new form that we just created? Sorry? Well, that's exactly, so what's happening is we're visiting /potatoes/new, and we're making a GET request to that. And if we scroll up a little bit, we have a route that's set up to answer that already. Except it thinks that new is a potato ID. So it's looking inside of our potatoes object for potatoes at new, coming back with nothing, therefore potato is undefined, and we get cannot read property type of undefined. Okay? So the order of your routes matters. Express reads them from the top of the file to the bottom of the file. So it says, hey, I got a GET request to /potatoes/some value, starts from the top of the file, works its way down, and goes, oh, this is the one, send that back. It doesn't know that we want to match this route. It doesn't ever get this far, and that's why we're not seeing our form. So if we want that, we have to move it up above the other one. Okay, so I moved it up to above the read. So now it will say, is it /potatoes/new? Great, serve the form. Otherwise, continue on down the page till you match another route. Okay, so if I'm going to have to restart the server. Ooh, look at that error. There we go. Now we see create a new potato. Does that make sense? That is definitely a gotcha. If you're not seeing what you expect to happen, but you know that you've coded it out correctly, then look at the order and make sure that it's not being caught by another path that's very close to that one. Okay? So this one will look, because we didn't say that, this one will match this exact path. And if it doesn't match, then it continues on down, which is why we can still say /potatoes/2 and get the potato number 2. Okay? So now we have a form, and we have the ability to create a new potato, but we cannot post to /potatoes because we haven't set up the ability to handle the form submission yet. So we need app.post to /potatoes. request and response. Okay, so we know that we have a potato object on the request body, right? Rather than pulling out all the individual things, like I said, we're just going to say request.body because we know that it is going to have a type, a weight, a color, and a size, right? Okay. So we have this. How do we get this into our potatoes object? We have an object of objects, and we have a brand new object that we want to put into that object. So we have the value, right? We have this portion. This is what we're going to get inside of request.body. So we need to define this portion, right? We need to come up with a key. But I can't just say potatoes at 4 equals potato, because that's extremely limiting, right? You don't want to ever hard code these values, because then we could create exactly one new potato. And any new potatoes would just overwrite that one over and over and over, right? So we need some way to dynamically generate a new ID. If you were inserting into a database or something like that, you would get the ID automatically. But since we are handling this ourselves, we need to create that ID. Well, the user hasn't sent along an ID because as far as they're concerned, they don't really care, right? How are you getting random short URLs inside of TinyApp? Sorry? Yes, you're generating a new string, right? So we could do that same thing. We could recode that. But there's another NPM package that is built just for that. Has anyone ever heard of a UUID? I'm going to take that as a no. Okay. So a UUID is a universally unique identifier. Okay. And so what this will do, if we npm install this package and bring it in, then it will output a random alphanumeric string for us. So we can actually just call this function, and every time you call it, it will generate some crazy alphanumeric string. And that seems pretty useful to us, right? That means that every new potato is going to get some universally unique identifier, a unique key. It's certainly not going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4 anymore. It's going to be some crazy thing. But we know it's going to be unique. We know that it's not going to be overwritten. And the rest of our code should be able to adapt to this, right? Just like as you're creating more short URLs, your code is adapting to that, right? You're still able to serve them back again. So the one that I like to use is UUID/4/v4. And this is the entire thing that it would give us back. But I think that we can use the array method split and split this on the hyphen so that we just get back like the first portion. That's going to be more than enough, right? 8 characters, random, that should be more than enough. So npmi UUID. There we go. Bring it in here. Const UUID equals require UUID, and we want v4. Is it? Yes. Require/v4, and then all we have to do is invoke it. They called it UUID v4. We can just call UUID and get a new universally unique identifier. So where are we? New potato, post to /potatoes. Awesome. So we're going to say const potato ID equals UUID. This would give us that whole string. So let's split on the hyphen and just return the 0th element. So does that make sense to everybody? So I'm splitting this into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements, and then we're just going to grab the 0th element. Okay? We're doing that all in one line. So now our potato is guaranteed to have a unique ID, and we're not going to run into that, like here, potatoes at 4. So let's move this up. And we can sub in our potato ID. So we're saying potatoes at potato ID equals potato. That's probably the best line of code I've written all week. Okay, so we made a post. We updated our data. What do we want to do with our response object? Response dot Do we want to render something? Redirect. I like it. Okay. And because it thinks new is a variable, exactly, Caitlin. Sorry, I didn't notice that the first time. Where do we want to send the users? Where do we want to send this user? They created a new potato. We could send them to that potatoes detail page, or we could send them to the potatoes page. What do you think? Where should we send them? To potatoes? So we can just see the new ones populate on the list? Sounds good to me. Awesome. Let's test this out. Listening on port 8080. Let's visit /potatoes. Okay. We'll have to include a link at some point. Let's go to /potato/new. We need a new type of potato. What was it we went with? Super duper potato. I like that. Weight 12, color blue, size million pounds. Create the potato, and now we have potato number A801CC95 is a super duper potato, and we see that we haven't broken our code. Our code can absolutely just react to this. It's just a new key value inside of our potatoes object. And as we did before, we could change super duper duper potato, weight of 20, a color of green, and 500,000 pounds, and we can update that potato. Okay, exactly like we were doing. Yes?
If you did want to just like use numbers instead of a random key, like to follow like the style of it, would you just need like a counter variable? Or?
You could keep a counter in memory. There's a couple different ways that you could do it. You could look at like object.keys and get back all the keys, and then do some kind of array thing to determine what the value of the greatest key was. You could like sort the keys and then see what the largest number is. Any method like that can be problematic, because if you're not quite spot on, you might end up overwriting an existing resource by saying, I've got this ID. By giving it a random crazy string like this, you have less likely to see collisions along the way. If it's important to you that they have readable human numbers, I would put that in as like a key inside of here and leave this alone. Does that make sense? Let this be some gross thing that the user is never going to see, because they're not actually going to pay attention to whatever URL they're visiting. They want to see what it looks like on the screen. So then you could have a nice ID number 12 or whatever. Okay? Any other questions before we move on to our last piece of bread? No? Okay. All right, so we have one last thing for bread. We have delete. Okay? So let's go down here. We'll go down below edit, delete. And if you were actually able to, by the way, Express can handle all those other verbs. You would just do app.delete or something. It's the fact that HTML cannot that we are stuck with post and get. Okay? So we're going to have a post to /potatoes/ID/delete, right? We're going to get a request and a response. Const potato ID equals request.params.id. Okay, so we have an ID, we have a potatoes object. How do we get rid of that potato? How do we get rid of a key from inside of a object in JavaScript? Yes, we actually use the delete operator. So we say delete potatoes at potato ID. And that will actually just remove this key value pair from this object. Okay? And then we had a post request, so what do we want to do? We want to redirect. And presumably we want to send them back to the potatoes page. Okay. So now our API, our server, is done. It can handle all the things for bread or CRUD, if you prefer, but our UI is not quite there. So let's go to potatoes, and let's throw in an href to say, it's going to go to /potatoes/new. create a new potato. There we go. So now we have the ability to link there. Refresh. Oh, that's right, because that one doesn't actually exist. The reason for this error is because the server restarted, so this potato doesn't exist. We could do some kind of error handling around this, that if potato is undefined, if you went into here, when you try to read this one, you could check and see if potato is undefined and send back like an error message, like a 404 potato not found, something like that. Okay. So let's go back to /potatoes. Now we see that we have a link that goes to create a new potato to our new form. We can go back and forth, but we need to be able to delete one of these potatoes, right? So it probably makes sense to put that on the detail page, I would think. So how are we going to go about deleting a potato? We need to make a post request, right? So we can't do it with an href. We can't do it with an anchor tag because anchors always make GET requests. So what's our option in the browser to make a post request? Images always make GET requests. Links always make GET requests. What do we have as an option in the browser for submitting post requests to the server? Forms. Yes, exactly. So let's put in another form here, which will have a method of post and an action of /potatoes/ we'll grab the potato ID, there we go, /delete. There we go. And all we have to do is put in a button, type equals submit, and we'll name it delete. Awesome. Restart the server. Refresh this, and now we have a delete button down here. So this is much easier because it's potatoes. This gets super dark when these are like cats and dogs and we have to delete one. But let's just assume we're going to eat one of these potatoes. So which one's going to get eaten? Yam. Perfect. Okay. And if we go down here and click delete, we were redirected and yam is gone. Yes, like magic. Exactly. Number 3, delete. We can create a new potato. Type is, oh, this is terrible. Russet. Oh, we went with super duper, right? Super duper potato. Weight is some arbitrary number. Color is blue, and size is 1,000,000 pounds. We create that potato. That looks great. We navigate to it. You notice it got a different random, put it here, absolutely random string. And then we're going to delete it. There we go. Yes?
Can you change the delete button to devour?
Yes. Yes, I can. There we go. Restart that and refresh. We'll see our potatoes. And now we have devour. So we can devour all the potatoes. And then we'll be left with no potatoes at all. Cool. So let's quickly jump back. Any other questions? Okay. So let's do a quick review. We reviewed Express.js and we talked about why we use it as developers. And we saw that within a couple hours, most of which I was prattling on, you can get a web server up and running, right? Very quickly. We discussed REST. Does anyone remember what REST stands for? Representational state transfer, right? What does it mean? It means that our paths, our routes to our resources describe the underlying structure of our resources. Okay. We implemented CRUD/bread over Express. We used forms, and we saw a lot of the different Express errors. Anything else before we wrap up? Are we good? Awesome. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you very much.